Welcome to CFR's Higher Education webinar. I'm Irina Faskianis, Vice President of the National Program and Outreach here at CFR. Today's discussion is on the record, and the video and transcript will be available on our website, cfr.org/academic, if you'd like to share it with your colleagues. As always, CFR takes no institutional positions on matters of policy. We're delighted to have Tarek El-Aris and Susanna Heschel with us to talk about navigating academic discourse on Israel and Palestine. Tarek El-Aris is a James Wright Professor and Chair of Middle Eastern Studies at Dartmouth College. Susanna Heschel is the Eli M. Black Distinguished Professor of Jewish Studies at Dartmouth College. And they teach together a class at Dartmouth called The Arab, the Jew, and Constructions of Modernity. So with that, I'm going to turn the conversation over to them to talk about how they teach this class and how they've worked together to address discourse on Israel and Palestine and Dartmouth and best practices as we all think about how to discuss these issues. So over to both of you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Irina. Just to backtrack a little bit on the idea of the class and also our collaboration, I'm originally from Beirut. I'm trained in philosophy and literary studies, and I grew up during the Civil War. And what we're going through right now is extremely difficult to watch, to engage, but this is something that we need to do, and this is something that I've been very interested in thinking about, and I've actually just wrote a book on the subject called Water on Fire, a memoir of war, which really starts in Beirut, or what was then called West Beirut, and ends in New York on 9/11, where I was actually teaching a course on the Middle East at NYU. And specifically on that day, I was teaching a class on Islam. And needless to say that these crises, these catastrophic event that happens from a region that I'm associated with, where I come, has been really fundamental to the way I think about scholarship, to the way I think about pedagogy, to the way I think also about teaching and the community building that I think is really fundamental for the conversation today. So I just wanted to kind of situate that within that context. And how do you think and deal with these questions, and how do you incorporate them? And where does the personal scholarship and the pedagogical engagement come, and so on? And my work has been really dealing also with the question of the universal and the questions of the Enlightenment tradition. I mean, this is very important, and questions of modernity. Also wrote on the subject in the context of Arab modernity, in the context of what's called the Nahda, or the 19th century Arab Renaissance, and which is this kind of engagement with European modernity. So this question of the universal or the experience of the European Enlightenment tradition, how it kind of affects different parts of the world, how it allowed us to understand questions of human rights or questions of the universality, is also at the core of this conversation here, and also of my intellectual training. So this question has been really fundamental, and I've also been interested in how a lot of these Arab intellectuals and scholars went to Europe and in the beginning of the 19th century, and how they experienced this modernity. And that is not just simply an intellectual experience where they're thinking about the ideas of the West and trying to translate them or reject them or accept them, but it is also an embodied experience. It's also, I've been working on this question of the somatic, on the affect. And my work has also been, again, tracing this question of the universal, of modernity, to also think about it in the context of the digital age. And my last book is called Leaks, Hacks, and Scandals. It's on digital culture and the Arab Spring, and also digital culture as transforming some of our concepts of writing, political protest, community, the public sphere, all that is associated with that kind of 18th century that has been reverberated and had major influences across the region. So I think I just want to kind of trace that genealogy. I think it's important to also see where we come from and what are the things that have shaped a little bit our work and where we have come and how we end up collaborating and also teaching this course that you mentioned.
Thank you, Irina. My name is Susanna Heschel, and as you mentioned, I am chair of the Jewish Studies program at Dartmouth College. And my work together with Tarek stems in part from my academic scholarship, also perhaps from the experiences that I had growing up. I grew up in New York City, and my father was a Jewish theologian, Abraham Joshua Heschel, and he was involved in the civil rights movement, in the Second Vatican Council, in the movement against the war in Vietnam. And those were important experiences for me in many levels. For one thing, civil rights movement and Dr. King made me fall in love with the Hebrew Bible. But it was also an example for me of how to talk to people from another community, from a completely different environment. When I saw my father and Dr. King and their relationship, or my father's work with Cardinal Bea at the Second Vatican Council and so on, I learned something about how to function in this world when you're talking about very difficult, very painful issues. My own scholarship looks at Germany, and in fact, I'm in Hamburg, Germany right now on a research fellowship at the Maimonides Institute. And I'm interested, my first book was a study of a Jewish historian in the 19th century in Germany who wrote an important book on the Quran, showing parallels between Judaism and the Quran. And then later he did work on Jewish rabbinic texts and the influence on the Gospels and the New Testament and Christian origins. So I was interested, as you see, in how Jewish studies overlaps or interacts, creates a synergy with other kinds of fields. And that continued with a book I wrote on Nazi theologians who supported Hitler. So the question of how does the academy respond to political crisis, to fascism in this particular case? And now I'm working on another study on the history of Jewish scholarship on Islam, but again, about interactions. I'm in the Department of Religion as well as in Jewish Studies. And the work that we do together, Tarek and I, on campus has become very important for both of us and also for our students. We teach the class together, the Jew, the Arab, the Jew, Constructions of Modernity. And we have a wonderful collection of students with different kinds of backgrounds, Palestinian and Jewish from all parts of the world. And we try to create an atmosphere in the classroom of community and engagement with one another. We want the students to see themselves as working with us to do academic investigation, discussion, analysis. So it was in that context then that on October 7th, when I was hearing the horrible news, I got a phone call from Tarek, and his voice sounded as horrified and devastated as I felt. And we planned 2 forums on campus that week of faculty, open to students, faculty, everyone. And the response was overwhelming, far more than I expected. I think what was important, we can talk more about those forums, but I just want to say that we sought to model for the campus how we speak to each other, what kind of a tone we take, even in the midst of a crisis. 4 of us from Jewish Studies and Middle Eastern Studies. We speak with respect, of course, with dignity, but also in doing that, we modeled for the students. So they asked questions that were sometimes difficult to hear, but they asked respectfully, politely. And so going on from there, we've established a series of dialogues, and we find that in our work together, having 2 professors teaching courses on difficult topics creates a much better atmosphere in the classroom, unites students, it shows students how to talk to each other even when they disagree, to have the dialogue taking place right there. So go ahead, Tarek.
And, and the idea we've worked this is my 7th year at Dartmouth, so this is really, we've been working a lot together also on inviting people and trying to bring different programs and departments to sponsor events, to bring authors, to bring filmmakers. So also there is, you know, even to bring a rock band. You know, we brought Mashrou' Layla at some point to Dartmouth right before COVID hit. And so, you know, and I'm coming to New York to see Hamid Simno's concert at the Met this weekend. So, I mean, you know, this is, you also have to create a community within the classroom and outside the classroom. And maybe Dartmouth, also where it is located, the size, also the resources. I mean, there are differences. Not every place has the same culture or the same abilities and the same, but this is, you know, our experience, and this is what we worked very, very consciously on building, is that, you know, we need to create this community that operates, that connects to culture, intellectual processes, learning, music, that brings all these bodies and different departments and programs together in an interesting way. And this is also what we teach. And we have Azzeddine Fishir, my colleague, co-teaches a course with Bernie Avishai in government on the politics of Israel-Palestine. Susanna was teaching in the fall a course on 1967 with a colleague also who works on Arabic literature, Jonathan Smolin. So, I mean, there is, and the administration has been very receptive and encouraging to these kinds of models that allowed us to come up with these courses and bring different disciplinary backgrounds. Like I come from literature and philosophy, and, you know, Susanna comes from religion and so on, and bring these different backgrounds also that are cross-disciplinary and that open up the subject matter in an interesting way. And our course, I mean, this is also what, you know, our research overlap is this question of the 19th century, which is very interesting in this part of the world, 18th, 19th century, is how Jews and Arabs deal with this question of modernity, which I think is very important. And because this is the question also of language, how Hebrew becomes modernized, standardized, Arabic, how it becomes standardized, how you rethink questions of community, questions of political institution, writing genres, but also how certain issues that are, you know, that deal with questions, for instance, of racism and xenophobia and anti-Semitism begin to influence or affect some of these relations. And I edited an anthology on this question where you have a lot of, called the Arab Renaissance, that we teach texts from it. And then you have all these, you know, Jewish intellectuals from Beirut, from Cairo, engaging with the Dreyfus Affair in 1894, 95. I mean, Dreyfus Affair is a huge global scandal, you know, at the end of the 19th century, and you have Reuters cable for the beginning of mass communication, you know, media technology that are starting. So people in Beirut are reading what's happening in Paris to Dreyfus as the cables are arriving. So and then you see like these questions, and then you have Zola, you have this, you know, Jewish woman from Beirut, Esther Moyal, who's writing about Zola and how Zola is defending Dreyfus in his famous article in J'accuse. So you also have and solidarity among Muslim scholars saying, where is the French Universal now? I mean, where is these, you know, human rights and equality and fraternity of the French Revolution in the face of this xenophobia, anti-Semitism that's coming out of France? So it's also interesting to create genealogies. Like, how do we connect the genealogy from Zola through Beirut, through Esther Moyal, to the intellectual speaking truth to power, to Foucault and Sartre and Edward Said, and how do you kind of bring different narratives to the students that expand also our understanding of what's happening in the Middle East, and also the kind of perspective of conflict. So I think when October 7th happened, the students were part of a community thinking about these things in multiple ways, in diverse ways, and students coming from different backgrounds.
Yes, I would just add to that it's important for me as the chair of the Jewish Studies program that we have alliances with the different departments and programs on campus, many different ones. So I want courses that we teach in Jewish studies, but that are cross-listed in African American studies, in sociology, history, religion, government, and so forth, women's studies. That's very important to me, and not only because of the alliances that we can create and in some sense reproduce what Tarek was just talking about in the Nachta, but also because this sheds light on aspects of Jewish history, of Jewish religious thought that we wouldn't otherwise recognize. We see, for example, the parallels between Jews coping with European modernity and Arabs coping in very similar ways, and also being horrified at some of the same things. So the construction of our identities has some parallels. There's a way in which teaching this class also demonstrates to students that there was a very different trajectory from what one might imagine looking back from today and all of the conflicts and terrible events and catastrophes that are going on, even at this moment. But to see that there was something else that was blossoming. It didn't last, but it may come back. And that also is an important element here, to give our students some hope and to show them also that the situations, the conflicts that we look at are terribly complex. So we tell the students, don't look for a simple narrative. Try to learn to hold on to complexity, something that can't be unraveled easily. There is no bad witch and fairy godmother, bad guy and good guy. Don't divide the world that way. That just exacerbates the polarization that's affecting all of us. See the complexity and look at the future. Imagine optimistically what you would like to see in 20, 30, 50 years. How can we get there? What are the roadblocks? What do we need to do? What can you, students, do? What problems can you tackle and overcome so that we can achieve something? Too often we are so mired in the present that we don't think about the future, and we have to offer our students that possibility and encourage them to think about a better future for themselves.
And this is pedagogically, it's really very important, especially now. I mean, when I look at the pictures coming out of the region, I mean, I'm devastated. But how do I deal with this devastation? And how do I transform it? Do I bring it to class as is? Because I feel like I also write on monsters and really kind of dark things that are happening in the world. But also like my cynicism and my sometimes despair. Like how I feel like when I'm in the classroom, I also have to give hope. I feel like I can't also just bring it as is to the classroom. I feel like in front of them, I want to be hopeful. I do it organically. It is not almost by design, but it is almost something, because I feel like I owe it to that generation also. And this is also kind of a question about where our personal research and what we teach, how they come together or they might differ, and how thinking pedagogically also is very important, especially in these moments of crisis.
Thank you very much. I want to go to the group for questions and comments, and then we can continue the conversation. So for all of you, we already have written questions and raised hands. So you know how to do it, but I'm just going to reiterate. Click the raised hand icon on your screen to ask a question. On an iPad or tablet, click the More button to access the raise hand feature. And when you're called upon, accept the unmute prompt and state your name and affiliation. You can also write your question in the Q&A icon. And if you do so, if you could please include your affiliation, we will, so we can, and I will read them out loud. So the first question, we're going to go to Mark Tesler.
This is a great discussion, and I hope I can ask a question to each of the speakers to push a little bit. the end of the 19th century that Tarek has been talking about is really an important period, and he did a good job of describing it. But it's in the context of a region where there are centers and peripheries. I mean, I went to school in Tunisia, and I would say that's part of the center, surprisingly. Egypt is the center, but Tunisia was not too far behind. But Palestine was the periphery, and wasn't totally untouched, but relatively speaking, change was much less and much slower. And there's an analysis by a number of Arab scholars. One of them was my professor a long time ago when I went to grad school, that this, I hesitate to use the word backwardness, but this relatively unchanged circumstance in Palestine with a traditional inward-looking elite, not really interested in the kinds of changes that are taking place in Egypt with the reopening of Ijtihad and so forth. And so the argument is that that's an important part of the story about why Palestinians fared so poorly in the context of their emerging confrontation with Zionism. And so I cover this period a bit in my own course on Israel-Palestine. I forgot to say I'm at the University of Michigan, where I teach about the Middle East. And so it's interesting to think about this period and the larger implications that Dr. El-Ariss has been pointing out, very significant. But if we kind of see what does that mean for Palestine, the story is going to be quite different. If I could ask a quick question, I'll try to be brief, to Professor Heschel. And I'd read your father's work, and I'm glad to know of you. This is a really interesting story as well, and how the two people are struggling together I've done some writing on this myself earlier in my career, to find their way to not lose their identity, to balance tradition, but to be of the modern world. This is not so much about Israel-Palestine, but this is an important story. But if we focus on, in particular, North Africa, and this would apply to Egypt to some extent as well, this meant for the Jewish populations of those societies less of an alliance in the service of a joint struggle that they're both engaging in, and more, it gets mixed up with colonialism. The Jewish elite, and to some extent the Jewish masses, become very European in their orientation. And so as we look to the evolution, the story isn't quite as happy, as both of these peoples have common concerns. They're facing them at the same time in history in response to the same stimuli from Europe. And my goodness, the dialogue between them is enriching. And we have examples of that. But I would say that isn't, and for at least the Maghreb, where there are 500,000 Jews, it's not the most important part of the story. This quest for modernization, in the end, doesn't build alliances with the Muslims in those countries. There are exceptions, but as a generalization, but rather puts them, if not politically, and sometimes it is political, but at least culturally on the side of the Europeans. And the divide between the indigenous Jewish population and the indigenous Muslim Arab population actually grows. So just a few things to food for thought. Thank you.
Correct. Let's go to you first, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, I think it's I also need to push back against your comment, but I think it's it's obviously a more complex story. I mean, a lot of the Palestinians are also studying at the Protestant Syrian College in Beirut. A lot of Lebanese from Mount Lebanon are in Cairo, founding Al Ahram. So it's a the way you locate cultural development or Nahda, or the way you define center and periphery, I contest this binary, and I think it's a much more complex picture, and you have a movement across that region. I mean, you have also people who are writing in exile in France. You have people who are in Russia studying, a lot of Lebanese Greek Orthodox, for instance, and Palestinians. So it's I think, we also need to think territorially, but also in terms of that region itself as kind of engaging with these questions of modernity in interesting ways. And of course, it's a complex relation to modernity. I mean, there is a pull, there is a rejection, there is a fascination, but if you look at it as a whole, comprehensively, you see that kind of movements and that we try to capture, in our class.
So, Mark, of course, I know who you are, and I know your work and admire it greatly. And far be it from me to answer the questions that you yourself write about. I just say that, of course, I agree with you. And we, in our class, when we do talk about these issues, we range from everything from Jessica Margolin's work to the rabbi's cat. And I think one of the big problems we focus on is the Cremieux Decree, and that has larger resonances, in fact, the significance, the political significance of something like that, how that is to be evaluated, and how something like that actually recurs throughout the course of Jewish history with often very dire consequences that you pointed out. So thank you for the comment, and thank you for your work.
Thank you. I'm going to take the next question, a written question from Allison Brisk at the University of California, Santa Barbara. She's a professor of global governance. She appreciates your model, but had different disturbing experiences teaching contemporary poli-science, IR, and human rights classes on a very politicized campus. My whole agenda is universalism, context, international humanitarian law for all sides. But about half of my students are simply locked into pre-existing identities and convictions and will complain when I try to present a basic range of perspectives and evidence on roots of the conflict. Do you have any suggestions for the beleaguered public university when students experience humanistic history as hate speech? I don't know who wants to start.
Go ahead, Tarek.
I mean, this is something we also struggled with. I mean, this question of the universal. We'll come back to it. That's of course the critique of the universal as Eurocentric, as only covering or being framed along very specific political lines that exclude the other or that does not represent people who might to come back to Marx's term, the periphery in some way, whatever that periphery is. So, but again, like when we're thinking about conflict, but how do you work outside of that framework? I mean, this is also the question. So how, and we need it in order to think of a community, we need to think of, do the critique of universality, but also take the good things, because we also have human rights. So how are we going to talk about human rights? How are we going to talk about things that matter for everyone, that we all need to care about and be mobilized, if we only situate forms of identity or rights in the particular, and the particular that is defined in very specific ways? And I think there should be teachable moments, like, okay, you don't think, let's ask the students, or let's organize teach-ins about what do they mean by certain terms. I mean, I think we use terms and concepts really without knowing what they truly mean, or what are their histories. I mean, we are at the university. This is the place to actually engage and say what, this kind of humanism or universality that is seen as Eurocentric and exclusive in many ways, then what is its history? How did it not also influence the way people in that part of, in Palestine, Lebanon, Egypt, different parts of the world, the way they also think of themselves as modern subjects and as claimants to particular, rights and traditions and so forth. So I think it's important to I know where we are. I mean, I understand the kind of current moment, but how do we try to bring it to a level where, okay, so what do you mean by this? Ask questions, listen, but then ask questions and open it up to a conversation. Maybe the class is about something else, but maybe because of the crisis, the class has to pivot or shift to a different moment that deals with the particular, with the particular event that is unfolding in the world.
Let me just add that I understand 100% and I've experienced it too. My sense is, first of all, students are very lonely. Identity, that kind of insistence on one's own identity, is a very lonely position to take. Students will end up saying, you will never understand what it feels like to be me. And that needs to be challenged. It may be, I will never understand you and your identity, but I can help you understand yourself better. I can help you accept relationships with other people and even be loved by other people. So there have to be ways to open up and not end with the declaration of identity. And that is a problem. I also would say that a lot of students have a very strong sense of injustice, and I admire that and appreciate it. But sometimes they get into a state of despair over it, and we need to make sure that we can lift them up and not let them sink into a hole of despair, but to talk in more concrete terms about what they can do and make it a viable engagement with injustice, overcoming injustice. So those are just a few things. There's so much more to say about it, but we both have experienced this and we're with you.
Thank you. Next question from Margaret Lewis, who's at Seton Hall University.
Thanks so much. I'm both a professor and an associate dean, so I think about this from several angles. So I wanted just to think more broadly about, navigating the academic discourse. It's one thing to do that in an intimate course setting where you know the students, they know you, but I wonder if you have thoughts both about how to create community conversations or spaces outside of a class when we do have a situation that emerges, for example, not just one we're having now, but, go back to Freddie Gray or anything that's really rocked our students. And then maybe separately, but if you have thoughts about university messaging, the emails that our students expect us to put out after events and the extent to which those are helpful. And if so, how to craft them in ways that, is it expressing care just for the students? How do we try to bring in different stakeholders to give us language that will work across different stakeholders? Any of that would be hugely helpful as we all navigate this. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a single answer that will address every institution, because there are important differences. You say you're at Seton Hall, which is Catholic, and it's a different culture on campus. I'm familiar with it. I actually lectured there a few months ago. In terms of the statements, I found that the outrage over many university president statements puzzling initially. And then I realized, I suppose, people were psychologically, emotionally so devastated. It was a displacement. And then a lot of argumentation arose over the precise language of statements. I'm not sure if statements are the way to address emotional devastation or catastrophe. And the statements that were quite formal in their language or politically oriented, perhaps that wasn't the way to do it. I'm not sure, I haven't been an administrator, exactly how to formulate it, but I think that's, in those kinds of moments, that's what people are looking for, some sense of support. I also think it's important in the convocation in the fall, Tarek and I were discussing this earlier, for the university to make its message clear, the mission. What are you supposed to be doing here, undergraduates at this university for the next 4 years? This is what we want to offer you. And then at some point later on, have the students write something, what they're looking for, because the only essay you have from them really is for the admissions. And once they arrive, it would be good to hear from them. What do you want to get out of these 4 years? What do you want from your classes, from your professors, and so on? And then finally, I just say that the atmosphere in the classroom is very important. friendly, happy, a joyous atmosphere throughout the semester to keep the students together as a group, having a good time, feeling that they're there for each other, forming a community. We find that very important when we're teaching a class that can, in fact, give rise to terrible conflict. We want to avoid that. So, we bring cookies, we have open door in our office, we have conversation. So again, the atmosphere. Tara, go ahead.
Yeah. No, and I think also we need to rethink, outreach. We also go to the students. We go to different religious groups, different houses. I went, Susanna went. We go also into their own spaces. Then we don't just organize the event and say, come, we go to them. And when we bring people, we've organized a couple of forums and we brought some people from outside and we said, we organized breakfast with the students. We organized places where the students also feel comfortable. And it's very important, this question of space and you going to them and they then are hosting you on their own, in their own dorms or their own, whatever houses and so on. I think that's very important. And also the administration is not, the more I think about it, it's not one thing. It's not like the administration is this abstract, thing like at a tower, the middle of campus. I'm also the administration. Susanna is also the administration. My office is open to these students. They come, I listen to them. Some of them are not happy with the way things are going. I comfort them. I sometimes transmit their messages to higher ups, and say this, and who ask me actually, like, how are the students doing? And I say, I met with so-and-so, and he said this, or she said that. And also I have, say, okay, I have this kid that said, okay, you're going to run the Arabic club this term. Or you're going to help me on this research dealing with these questions, because I also have the ability to recognize some of the things they're struggling with. So the administration, we have to, or how the university responds has to be rethought and also support organic processes that are already happening. Who among the faculty are in conversation? What can the administration do to give them more support, to highlight more what they're doing? So, we're seeing some efforts that are coming from high up, from the top down. Like, okay, we're going to have a task force and start dialogue. But I think it's important that the administration responds to what faculty are doing and support it. So support these organic processes, these community building processes that I think are much more effective and are more likely to produce results than some sort of kind of let's bring a consultant and tell us what we have to do and then form this committee and then make everyone go through modules about how to be a good citizen in this university. I don't think that is effective. I don't think it's effective in also in other contexts that we've been experiencing on campuses.
I'm going to take a written question from Mark Diamond, which is, I think, follows on to this, from La Loya Marymount University in Los Angeles. Could both of you share your thoughts about academic freedom on college campuses, especially as it relates to discourse on Israel and Palestine? When, if at all, is a student or faculty discourse on campus out of bounds and poses a threat to others in the university?
Well, I can't address the legal issues. I know that each university has a set of standards and so forth, and they may well vary. I know one college president of a Catholic university told the students, you may hold a prayer vigil, but you may not hold a demonstration. And that was that. So that I don't think happens everywhere, but that was one example. What is out of bounds? What's out of bounds is, I would say, first of all, people who don't know very much about the topic that they're addressing or screaming about. So I begin with that. I was talking to some colleagues about this. Don't teach a course if you don't really know the subject, or limit the course to what you know. I would encourage students who are deeply concerned about a political conflict to take courses on that conflict to get some background. We also encourage our students to think about what they can do in the future. Making a demonstration on a college campus is exciting, but actually it can be more important to work for a political candidate, for example, to do canvassing, and to work for an NGO, or come to Washington and be an aide at a congressional office. So pointing that out to an 18-year-old is sometimes very helpful, telling them that they can actually do something very concrete and powerful, not just on the college campus, but on a national level of politics. And then I would say, yes, in terms of the kind of language and out of bounds, that's really our point of our work. We wanted to demonstrate to the campus how to have a dialogue that's respectful, that's polite, even if we disagree, and that we talk to one another at a university in a way that's different from the kind of conversation one has at a restaurant with your friends. We also emphasize that there's a distinction between private and public. I may have some pretty strong views that I tell my family or my close friends. I'm not going to tell the whole world. That would be highly inappropriate. I think faculty need to be professional, and so do students. Once you're in a university, you have to be a student. That's a particular role, an academic role, and that also should be outlined to students when they're admitted to the university or at the fall convocation. Professional behavior is something we expect from everyone, from a doctor, a lawyer, a plumber, electrician. I don't want vulgar sexist jokes when I'm consulting a physician, for example. And I don't want a certain kind of language from faculty colleagues. So these are basic standards of behavior that I think have been eroding in recent years, and we need to come back to them.
Yeah, but we also, we also understand that the university itself, the educational mission, and the university as an institution is no longer correspond to the model that we also study, or the Humboldt model, or the creation and the formation of the national subject. So there is also something about the university itself that is shifting in terms of its terms of use. I mean, people say, I mean, if you also look at statistics about what people think of higher education in the US and so on. So there is a lot of questions about the university. What is the university? I mean, a lot of kids come to the university, they already know more than we do about a lot of things. They have technology on their side. Some of them are making money from apps that they created, and they talk to their parents and they say, is it really a good investment or not? So also we have to acknowledge that there is something about the university that the humanistic tradition and the liberal tradition that perhaps is no longer functioning in the same way that we imagine it to be. And we need to take this challenge seriously. And is the green a place where you take your students when it's nice out, if you are in Ithaca or Ann Arbor in April or end of April to do the class outside because you're missing the sun? Or is the green a place of protest now, or the identity affirmation? So there are real fundamental questions about the university and about our mission and about our classrooms, and how do we, and it's not an either or, it is not either this or that. How do we kind of bring the community into a space of negotiation where I understand that this is what the students are feeling right now, and they are angry and they want to express themselves in an embodied fashion and really do something about the world, because we also expect them, when we ask them to apply, how they're going to change the world. So we also set them up for it, and so we need to have a conversation about that. And this is a moment of crisis, but it's a moment of self-reflection that I think is really important to have. Every university needs to have it. And it could have been, some other crisis unfolding, but I think this is an opportunity to ask these questions and have these conversations among, and Susanna was just, we're talking today that we should have these conversations with faculty, with colleagues, cross-generationally. What do people think? How are they teaching? How do they come to the subject that they come to? What are their assumptions? What is the point of the classroom? Is it a political platform? Is it a place of intellectual inquiry? How do they come together? So these are important questions, I feel like, and this is the moment to ask them and engage them.
Thank you. I'm going to take the next question from Heidi Lane.
Thank you very much. The question I have relates to things that I don't actually experience in professional military education, but I have in teaching in universities like Dartmouth. And the question is, what do you think Dartmouth or universities in general should be doing to help faculty like yourselves, engage in this kind of open trust building course? That's the first question, because that really is a pressure that I think a lot of universities and administrators are feeling, and navigating that for their faculty is maybe even as difficult as the relationship between the faculty and the students. That's the first thing. And then the second question is, how do you change your model when you are teaching in, let's say, an open session that's like a lecture that is not part of the course? Because it's one thing to build that trust within your class, within maybe 20 or so students over a semester, but it's another thing to apply that same model when you're going into an open session and, maybe even people from outside the campus are coming. So thank you.
Those are big questions. Thank you. There's much to say. I'll just say briefly. So on October 9th, Monday morning at 9 a.m., my phone rang. It was the Dean of Faculty at Dartmouth calling to tell me that the president of Dartmouth, who was new, Sian Bailak, had asked her to get in touch with me because the president wanted to have dialogue on campus. So too often, I am afraid, administrations aren't really aligned with their own faculty. They don't know who's teaching what or who has what expertise, and they don't turn to faculty in moments like this. And I actually have seen that happen after October 7th. There are times when I thought, why didn't the president call the faculty, get the faculty who are the ones working with students to set up the kinds of forums that we held? I think it would have been very helpful. There is sometimes not a close enough relationship at some colleges and universities between administration and faculty. And faculty can actually help a great deal, since we're spending every day with the students in the classroom. So that's one thing. I think another issue is when we hire faculty, we have to make sure we're hiring people who are willing to engage in dialogue, who are willing to sit down and talk to people or teach with people from other programs, people who have different backgrounds with whom they may disagree. If they're willing and enthusiastically willing to do that kind of teaching, then I say, bravo, hire them. But those who are unwilling, that's a problem at a university. If we aren't talking to each other as faculty, then the institution is going to fall apart. We need to have that engagement. That includes in the sciences. The biologists and the geologists talk to each other. So we have to foster that and make that an imperative, actually, a criterion for faculty. Are they engaged with one another? Are they open, willing to talk? There's more to say, but Tarek, you go ahead.
No, I mean, basically recognize where there are efforts in, where there are conversations, productive conversations, and see how you can support them. Support them financially, support them logistically, assign space, fund. I mean, this is how, I mean, we're lucky, really, we're really lucky. I mean, in many ways, to have each other, but also to have an administration that was very receptive and very supportive and said, what do you need? How can we help you to continue to do this? And that was very important. And they understood that, and they recognized. I mean, they knew us, but we were kind of, I would say, a bit under the radar, and there is a new administration, a new kind of leadership. So again, it's like immediately they recognized that, okay, they're doing something, and what can we do to support it? How can we make it grow? How can we... And they continue to do that. And we took the initiative. We also went on a retreat to think about courses, to think about people we want to invite. So, I mean, I think it's important that you have an administration or who are on the ground, who are talking to faculty, who are, have their hand on the pulse and see where these collaborations are, and then try to figure out ways where, again, the changes are not coming from some cookie cutter model that's coming from the outside and being imposed on the campus, on the faculty, but actually, I mean, I'm a literary critic, and I always tell the students, read the text, like do a close reading. So do your close reading and see what is happening. And then from there, you move to the theoretical. No, don't impose the theory on the situation, but rather let it come out of what is happening on the ground. And I think, so this requires this different administrative direction from what we've been witnessing, which is bringing people from outside and training us in all kinds of ways to be, better teachers and more humane and so on. And that's taking the place of a lot of the things we do, like the humanities especially, which is supposed to be doing that. So recognize and build these infrastructures of support by recognizing what's happening on your campus and the particularity of your campus and your student body and your geographic location.
What Tarek is trying to emphasize is that what's important for the college is teaching that engages students in a dialogue, that brings students from different positions together, that's what should be recognized as the most important innovation in teaching, the most important thing for the future of the college and for the students. And not the size of the classroom, let's say. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to take the next question from Karen Jackson Weaver, who is Associate Vice President of Global Inclusive Faculty Engagement and Innovation Advancement at NYU. And she also comes to this as a former dean at both Princeton and Harvard Kennedy School. So thanks you both for the important framing of your collaboration and the work you've done at Dartmouth. My sense is that the kind of sophistication and complexity that Professor Heschel mentioned that is very much needed is missing in academic discourse and embedded conversations taking place on college campuses. Do you have any suggested guides or resources that you can share which have been useful in the Dartmouth community and elevate the discourse in a meaningful way?
Mm-hmm. Look, I that's a great question, and it's going to be waking me up in the middle of the night for someone to think of some things to tell you. And yeah, but I would just say that, I come to this because I wrote a book about a Jewish scholar writing about the Jewishness of the New Testament, about Jesus in the context of Judaism and so on. Abraham Geiger was his name. And how the Christians responded to his arguments very negatively, very critical, and he responded to them and so on. So that was a kind of engagement that I analyzed very carefully, something primarily from the late 1850s, 60s, and 70s. And that gave me a way of So understanding the subtlety of arguments, how they were perceived in the moment. So that trained me to look for things like this. And I think that's what I bring to this kind of situation, this way of trying to engage in, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my simple answer would be us. But you know, we'd actually be working on coming up with some, you know, dialogue, reflections on dialogue, or some resources that might about this, because this is also something that we're thinking about, not about what we're doing, but also as some sort of values that I think are important, not just for us, for our campus, and for the different constituencies on our campus who want to engage in this, who want to organize events dealing with these questions. So I think eventually we will develop something, but this is not, I mean, really, we were just doing our normal work and working on the Nahda, and then, you know,
Yeah, but I would say that we understand that fields develop by engaging with different disciplines, with different theoretical models. That's how we move ahead in a field. So I would say, first of all, to any faculty member, think about how your field is developed and what has generated new ideas. What's made it exciting is to engage with others, not to simply hide in its own corner. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go next to Stephen Zunas with a raised hand. And we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Okay, how about now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Hi, I'm Stephen Zunas, University of San Francisco. I've been teaching Israel and Palestine for over 35 years now, and there's been a big shift in sort of the assumptions that students come in with. I mean, when I first started teaching, pretty much every student was familiar with the Israeli narrative, but not really aware of the Palestinian narrative. So I had to bend over backwards to make sure they knew that as well. Today, if anything, it's the other way around. It's been quite striking, the shift, the generational shift. I mean, it may be because, you know, the larger percentage are people of color. These people, this is a generation where Black Lives Matter, indigenous rights, you know, whereas our generation, where, you know, the nationalism was a progressive force, and many of us saw Zionism as a national liberation movement for Jews. Nationalism seems more of a reactionary force to today's youth of Eastern Europe and everything else, and Israel's seen more as a colonial settler state. And I was wondering, since it appears you all have been teaching this for a while too, I was wondering if you've noticed similar shifts and how you might have adjusted your teaching in light of this.
I think, you know, I don't know. I think a lot of our students come, they don't know a lot about this, and maybe this is, you know, where we are or different campuses. I mean, there are some students who know and who are engaged, but I think, you know, what we try to do is that we try to kind of give them the longer history of this. So take them back to the 18th century, 19th century, and to see where, you know, they ended up. So not to kind of focus, like we have colleagues who teach like Israel, the politics of Israel, Palestine, and focus on the contemporary conflict. So they are more, they can tell you more about what the students say about those particular narratives. But the students who come to us really don't know anything beyond like the contemporary conflict, if they know anything. So we try to take them to places that really are uncharted, like, you know, Damascus affair, the Dreyfus affair. I mean, Max Nordau on early Zionism. I mean, so texts that are foundational, and then they take politics of Israel, Palestine, and then they engage it, and they have a different understanding. So we try to do the kind of earlier work to open up those narratives. So we're not just simply pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli, or, you know, outside of these just simple binaries. We kind of take them even to open a wider horizon.
I would just add that I think I've also noticed what you've noticed. There seems to be also just a wide rift generationally on these political issues, and on many others as well, of course. What I found in the course that I taught together with Jonathan Smolin in the fall on the 1967 war, sometimes called the Six-Day War, students came in and they thought they knew something, on both sides, by the way, but it turns out they didn't. So that's one thing, to show students what they don't know, that what they know is only a drop in the bucket and there's so much more. Also, to show them that whatever you think you know, there's something new that comes in that actually contradicts that assumption, because there's so much evidence coming from so many different parts of the world, because it's not ever really about just Israel and Palestine. It's about nearly every other country one can think of, from the United States to China. So the complexity is something. And then another, finally, I want to say, sometimes students come in and they're looking for somebody to blame. That's something important for us to address. This is not about blaming one side or the other. And sometimes, for example, one side is bad and one side is good. Sometimes both are bad. And when both are bad, I tell them, even someone who has committed a terrible crime, don't you still care about that person? That's still a human being who should be treated with dignity. So let's keep that in mind as well. Let's remember that even those who do terrible things, nonetheless, these are human beings. There are reasons for it. Let's figure that out. Let's see what we can do about it. But don't just dismiss it and say, oh, well, they're terrible, let's walk away. So to keep the students engaged all the time, to show the complexity, to show that it's more and more and more complex, involving so many different groups, and not try to reduce it to bad guys, good guys. This one is to blame. This one is the innocent. Nobody ultimately in politics is innocent, and nobody is 100% guilty. They become interlocking, as we know, and they're doing that dance. What was the line about Fred Astaire danced with, who was it? Not Jane Crawford, Ginger Rogers, but she did everything he did, but backwards and wearing high heels. So there are ways in which each side influences the other, and we have to think about it in those terms as well. They're not separate from each other. So those are some of the ways we try to overcome the biases that they walk into the classroom with. And we ask them sometimes, how has your mind changed in the last few weeks of the course? Every few weeks, ask them that. What changes here when we bring you this document or this fact that you didn't know about? And hopefully they will experience the classes as something uplifting and exciting. They will know that they're coming away as a different person with so much more knowledge. So thanks for the question.
And with that, we are at the end of our hour. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all the questions, raised hands, but I can say that I wish I were at Dartmouth and could take your class. So maybe perhaps you should do it and have it be available online to a broader group. I don't know. It's a thought. But thank you very much, Tarek El-Ariss and Susanna Heschel, for this wonderful hour. We do appreciate it. And to all of you for your questions and comments. And we encourage you to follow us at CFR_academic on X, and visit CFR.org, foreignaffairs.com, and thinkglobalhealth.org for research and analysis on global issues. And we look forward to your continued participation in CFR programs. So thank you again.